Hello, my name is Jeff Beller. I'm with Renew the Earth, and this is sponsored by the HREM, and it's for Bridges Programming. We have here three people who were talking in the lobby, and I invited them to talk in front of a microphone. So here we are. Your name is?
Brendan Noakes. Brendan Noakes at Millennium Energy Finance, Director of Operations.
My name is Antonio Antonopoulos, REngenuity Inc. I'm the founder.
And my name is Jose Biaou. I'm Director of Capital Markets at Millennium Energy Finance.
Okay, you were talking in front of the lobby before I interrupted you guys. I'm talking a little louder because I'm not facing the mic, but it's working. So go ahead and continue on with your conversation.
Right.
We were talking about the difficulties that small-scale renewables face in being financed, and how it's relatively easy to fund a $100 million or $500 million project, or at least it's easier to raise such funds from banks, established banks, investors, pension funds. Whereas if you have a $1 million project, it's at the international scale effectively impossible, at least under the current structure. So we were just chit-chatting about some of the issues.
Absolutely, and we were just introducing our company to Antonio, Millennium Energy Finance. It's a new platform, really a online private placement portal, originating smaller to mid-sized scale projects and matching them with different type of lenders, mainly on the institutional side, but obviously using that crowdfunding aspect to fund smaller scale projects as a creative, innovative way to address that issue that Antonio has just mentioned. And just very interested in learning more about the process and how to bring the adequate capital sources to fill this gap that we identified in the market.
Yeah, I find this very interesting, this conversation. I'm Susan Comont. I'm working with Jeff Beller to do these short interviews. It seems to me it comes down to how much risk banks are willing to take, and they're not really willing to take much risk. They're looking for something that's proven before they will invest, but they're the only ones that are in a position at this time in the economic system as it is to take risks, because they're getting huge influxes of monies. How do we give courage to these banks? How do we say, look, this is how do we give them some urgency for this? How do we, advise a banking system that this is the time that they need to be brave and they need to behave in a different way than they've ever behaved, and they need to come to something like this and look at, they could fund all these technologies with no problem at all. Here, you know where I'm going with this.
Susan, there's obviously that huge disconnect where you've got a plethora of institutions and large amounts of money that want to get into well-developed markets such as the United States, and these returns on projects are lower than if you were doing a smaller off-grid project that would, if you had that investor confidence, would deliver you a far greater return. It would be much better environmentally, socially as well for that specific developing country or community or business. And so I guess what we were all discussing was bridging that gap, bringing together what we know in the more developed markets, going through that checklist, creating that consumer or retail institutional confidence, and then putting all the parties together, adding a tech element to it as well through a institutional crowdfunding platform. So we were speaking to Antonio about that. We're hoping to launch it. MEF is hoping to launch it Q1 2015. So it is really just like opening up the marketplace and making sure that people are aware of those different avenues. Players can then do, partner with other players, and then where there's that 10 or 20% gap to get things going, that is where we come in, so that the banks have that confidence to then step in and fund a project that would otherwise be known as risky.
No, absolutely. And Susan, just to address your point about banks, the critical issue in capital raising in renewable energies, the debt most of the time is there when the equity capital has been identified. And you have players like OPIC that are great sources of debt capital for even smaller scale projects and emerging and frontier markets, the key issue to executing on projects is the equity. And that's really where MEF comes in, raising alternative capital, innovative capital to plug that equity gap. And once we're able to identify that, I think you'll see a larger amount of projects in the pipeline actually coming out of the ground and going into production.
And although I just met the fellas moments ago, I will say that great minds think alike, because I'm also working on not an institutional financial portal, let's say, but on a consumer crowdfunding portal for international renewable.
Can you explain what a consumer crowdfunding portal?
I mean, instead of this portal for institutional investors, like but are sometimes known as accredited investors, I suppose,
right.
That have a certain minimum income. Typically, it's in the $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 range. The facility that I'm working on is for just literally anyone with $5, $10, $20, but in order to raise money for small scale renewable projects.
Community-based.
I would say, sure, community-based as well.
Retail.
And, it's called retail. So anyway, speaking to Jose, we were talking about Millennium Energy Finance. The light bulb went off in my mind and said, well, this is very interesting for a collaboration. And these sort of events are great for this sort of thing, where you meet random people, but they're doing interesting things around the world.
I want to bring something out that, from what I gathered from listening to you guys in the lobby, the funding normally, you need 20% upfront money before a bank would actually finance the project. Is that correct?
Not necessarily, but they want to see that you have some equity lined up. Like guys like OPIC, they're looking for projects to fund. And I keep mentioning them because they're one of the standard guys in the industry for debt financing, but they want to see that you have an actual plan in place and that you are lined up with certain level of equity. In terms of the capital structure, you're probably looking at 75% on the debt side, standard lead. So you're looking to raise at least 25, and for more risky for riskier projects, 30 to 35% of equity.
What I gather is, if we could get let's suppose the little guy involved to put up $5 a piece, and the whole community puts in, let's say 25 or 25.
Because they think it's a great idea?
Because they want to see renewable energy in their project.
Correct.
Then we can get the OPEC guys with the big bucks.
There you go.
To put the rest of it in, because there's skin in the game.
Hit the nail.
But this is like a chasm for somebody who's developing technology. This is a chasm that cannot be leapt by most of them, this 25% or whatever. And they're probably not capable in their minds, for most of the people who are inventing, to go into your realm and say, how do I work this? They don't even understand it. They only understand what they're developing, what they're making. They've got a huge gap of understanding
because of
here.
disparity in the
Plus,
wealth.
you've got a gap between these people with the $5 understanding the technology.
Correct.
You've got a chasm here and a chasm there. We're trying to jump the chasm, from the $5 to the technology, by getting more information out on the internet with interviews like this. But you guys are the specialists with the connection between the project and the bank.
We're a digital financial intermediary per se.
Right. And how would you explain what you do to a layperson? Like you got a inventor, and you're trying to clear his or her mind to focus on getting this chunk of money that'll give confidence to the bank. I mean, how do you help them? How do you guide them?
If I could just, and this is something that, not to disregard certain technologies, but I'm operating on the view that climate change is a serious problem, and we need to address it as soon as possible.
Right, you can get a consensus on that, maybe from your $5 people who are...
Right. And so the technologies exist today to address this, and even I would say economically, if things operate on a level playing field. Like people talk about the low costs of nuclear power, for example, or the low costs of natural gas. If you don't account for the externalities, or you don't account for
subsidies
other subsidies, etc., or like nuclear power plants don't pay for insurance, natural gas don't pay for the health effects to the people. So if you don't account for all these things, sure, they look cheaper, but and on a real unsubsidized playing field, renewables already exist, existing renewables like solar PV, wind, etc. So my view is that
effectively they exist.
My view is that we don't need. I mean, we definitely need innovation. We definitely need new technology. But like in terms of deployment today, there's existing technologies, and that's where that gap. Like there's a huge gap between like an inventor. You just mentioned inventor or new technology. There's a huge gap between that and getting to commercialization and getting the funds for that from anyone, whether it's from a bank or from a crown.
At this point, isn't that an artificial? Isn't that
I wouldn't call it artificial because
that is really an obstacle that
there are risks with new technology. That there's a reason why investors are
technologies. I mean, solar's been around for 40 years.
Anyway, where I was just driving at was that the existing technologies that are here now are able to be financed, either from established banks in established markets or via innovative solutions that we've been talking about with crowdfunding or institutional crowdfunding, to bridge that gap between the projects with established technology that can solve climate change issues today. So that exists, and now this other aspect of raising money for new technology and sort of venture capital from maybe new sources, this is interesting, but I mean I'm not focused on that just because it's just a harder nut to crack and much more risky.
Okay, so what
but you're not generating any cash flow from climate change projects either, are you? I mean, on the renewable energy side, you're actually generating cash flow to support your funds that you need.
Well, I mean, you've got your political risks and your small developing island nations. You can do some modeling to say if we put infrastructure in now to protect these buildings, then we won't have to do the work 20 or 30 years from now. So that can be accounted for.
I meant renewable energy as an investment vehicle for
But just to come back
to
the original question though, what we are doing is you've got your crowdfunding, which exists now, and that's like $100 between friends to go out to a movie, and then you've got institutional crowdfunding, but what we're doing is, you see, microfinance is here and already there as well. So we're using that to but on like a more creative web-based platform to get as many eyes looking at it and as many hands putting money into the project as possible, and then we're doing that on an institutional level as well. So there's just two forms of financing. We're acting as project managers as well to get a project that we believe up and running. So I guess that can be the answer to people who, the layperson who asks that original question.
So how are you educating the layperson? I mean, I assume you're getting at these possible donors through the internet. I assume that's what's the mechanism for that? How are you educating people so that you get more?
Well, the process is pretty it's broken down seamlessly on the website. I think you just read through it. Antonio mentioned he had a mock website that he set up, really just breaking down the process.
Can you summarize it real quickly because we're on the air?
No, absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, I come from a commercial real estate finance background, and that's really where that idea came to me. But the model that Brendan put together for our presentation, I think, really outlines the process really where it's pretty simple. The developer comes onto our website, introduces its project.
Oh, give your website out too, please.
Okay, yeah, that'll help you.
Millenergyfin.com.
Spell that.
MILL energyfin.com.
Okay. And your website?
My website for my company is www.REngenuity.com. That's RENGENUITY.com. And the website I was referring to on the crowdfunding is crowdfundingrenewables.com. I just wanted to say that you mentioned about how to get banks to lend to projects. So banks are so conservative that. Sorry, did you want to bring something?
No, go for it. I was just going to show these guys later on, but that's fine.
No, you will go there too.
That's fine.
I'm working on a project right now that I was explaining to the fellas with the Inter-American Development Bank, right, which has politically their political masters, or I mean, not to say it in a negative way, like have stated that we want support of renewable energy, right? So, so the Inter-American Development Bank, with their funds, are supporting a project that we're working on in Barbados, where they're setting up a guarantee fund for the commercial banks in Barbados to lend to lend to small renewable energy projects less than $1 million at favorable terms, right, or more favorable than what exists now.
So they're dedicating that fund
to
those projects.
That's an example of like how do you get, for example, the local banks in XYZ country, in this case we're talking about Barbados, to actually start lending to renewable energy projects.
So I missed, where did this fund originally come from the bank?
From the Inter-American Development Bank, which is a
so
bank
it's
funded by the
bank.
United States and Canada. It's a development bank, right?
Okay.
So that's a potential solution for, I guess, certain countries, right? But really, ultimately, what that is coming from is from the political will to say, this is the way it has to be done. And I think that if you just leave the banks to do what they do, which is just, make money.
Well, sit back on their pile of gold.
That's
that's what they're doing.
They're in the
they may
business
want
of lending,
they
so
may want
they have to get the capital out one way.
They may want to invest in renewable energy if it's attractive to them, and it is in some instances. But in other cases, they're less willing. And if there's some sort of mechanism
you
to
understand why they're less willing, because there's more money elsewhere for them to get return on, and that fossil fuel is still king. We got to get that out.
His motive is climate change. He's thinking you open the statement by saying your push for this is climate change and how important
through
this is.
Through renewable energy.
Renewable energy.
So that makes perfect sense.
So if the banks say, look, I don't like the project and I'm not making enough profit, we're not going to do renewable energy, don't they realize if in fact there is such a thing as climate change, when let's say it may be debatable to bankers?
Right.
Well,
then they're saying, well, we'll just allow the CO2s to go up to 550 and see what happens after that.
Then we'll be making profit on gas masks and survival equipment.
But the whole reason for like these new like web-based platforms is like
they don't have your backs, is what I'm trying to say.
That's fine, and we're like, okay, we understand you're not going to support that project, but I know a few other a dozen investors who will, and so you set up this shop that is more of a for-purpose mechanism, investing in projects that you think is better environmentally, socially, and economically for that area that really needs it the most, and you're allowing the most amount of investment to come into it. So if the bank's not going to do it, that's fine, because we'll get that project to a further stage when they're going to have to say yes, because otherwise their competitor is going to say yes.
I think this is excellent what you're saying, but may I say something before you? I think this is excellent what you're saying, and I think that you're going with the consensus that climate change is real, with a consensus which is essentially humanitarian preservation of the economical use of natural resources, preservation of our natural world. You're talking about inserting a humanitarian groundswell and coming up to meet the attitude or whatever of the banking system at this time, which is developing in a completely different profit motive type of situation. I'm asking whether there's some way to insert, with this pressure from your groundswell, and I think that's the only way it's going to come and change maybe attitudes in the banking system. You have to almost embarrass them into becoming humanitarian. I mean, and into, it's almost like you've got to do a sneak attack on banks that will almost, they're going to see all these $5 donations, and they're going to see you got to get so much pressure on them from people who are buying stuff in the world and making choices every day. And that pressure, you got to embarrass them. You got to almost change.
You have to break in, because she's like
the way I see it. At the end of the day, banks are in business of lending, right? And if you do present an economically feasible project,
how do you make them more humane?
But that's my point is, if you have a bankable project and the numbers work, well, they're in the business of lending, they will lend on it. So
But
we don't have to necessarily
the
sneak it.
numbers are not humane.
We're not
The
here to
numbers
try
won't
and
work
change
for
the
the
banking
bank.
system. Well,
Well,
our
the
motive
renewable
is to
energy
get
numbers haven't worked for the bank.
we're here to get as much renewable energy into the places that need it the most as quickly as possible, breaking down the bottleneck and expediting the process. We're not here to change the whole entire banking system.
Right.
They can't.
No, I know you can't.
That's business as usual, but they can transform their ways to something that works. And so we're hoping to get something off the ground that will work. So what their business as usual practice, if that works for them, that works for them, because I think the three of us impatiently want to see things get off the ground quicker than business as usual, and so we can lament all we want on business as usual and and old money practices.
Excellent.
But the things that are out there exist so that we can creatively put things together to get these projects
Yeah, we're
to work.
trying to do the sneak attack through the internet too.
I mean, I will
So
say.
I'm very,
I don't like
very
the word
impressed.
attack, by the way.
No, it's, again, this
I
thing
like
is,
the word in harmony to get the planet, get the humanity
Might as
working.
well say what it is.
We maybe should be wrapping up to go to the next
Certainly.
session. But
And
I just
this
wanted
has
to.
been a delight.
I just wanted to say, bankers ultimately, the banks.
They are people, right?
Sorry, exactly. Like, banks are ultimately for my people.
I
I know
hope
a
so.
lot of bankers because
You're an
over the years,
ex-banker, right?
I'm not an ex-banker, but I've
throw him under the bus.
worked on very large financing of projects. So I've dealt with bankers, and for example, in Barbados, I'm meeting with all the top banks there, and the people are very keen to. They're very interested in renewable energy. They're very interested in energy efficiency, and so they're there, and they're actually willing to push the bank, right? So it's not that. I don't want to make it sound that the banks are evil. I don't think
No,
they
they're
are.
not.
Because they're ultimately made by people that
they're just
actually
being
care.
good capitalists.
But they have to work within the existing
Right,
system, and that's where you brought up a point about the climate change in the future. They like any of us, there's no current way to value or put any sort of risk to this future climate change. It's not like the bank can say, okay, well, I can offer lower interest rate for this project because in 100 years we're not going to have flooding. But there's no way for them to actually do that, and that's where I mentioned on the political side, if we could get finally some sort of international agreement which has eluded us on climate change, like a real Kyoto Protocol or something, there would then be a mechanism for these banks, which are made up of people that care, to actually do things.
Depends on how much
right?
denial they're in.
So
I mean,
we need the political capital to
Okay,
finally.
we're gonna
No, I
talk
admire your
I'm gonna-
enthusiasm.
Well,
and
I want to wrap this
commitment.
up. I want to thank you guys for being with us. My name is Jeff Bellis. This is Comont. This has been a lobby talk, and I think this is the first lobby talk ever recorded
At the
as a-
Renewable Energy
and-
Latin American Caribbean Conference.
And I want to thank you all for listening. This is
Thank you so much.
and
All three of you.
We'll be back
Thanks,
with the
Gus.
next interview very shortly.